So we've had 3 great messages already. Are you full yet? My dad used to have an expression after he'd had a big meal, I am FUFTB, which meant full up and fit to bust. But for us believers, I can change that slightly, full up with faith, truth and blessings. Are you full yet? Right answer. Good. One more. As it works out, I'm speaking about that most sensitive of subjects, money. Not that I'm the sort of pastor that talks on money every week, but it's because of a cow that I met, and I'll get to that later. I want to reassure you, those of you who don't come from Port Campbell, that your pastors did not ask me to talk about money. Okay, so this is not aimed at anyone in particular. I'm talking about the parable of the shrewd manager, so let me read that. It's in Luke 16, 1 to 15. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear? Give an account of your management because you cannot be manager any longer." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig and I'm too proud to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their homes." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 400. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he said. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than other people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No servant can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight." So this is a parable that has caused some problems in understanding. And if you read that parable, there's probably 2 problems that hit you straight away in verses 8 and 9. And the one in verse 8 is that the master commended the servant. But it's important to understand that he's not being commended for being dishonest. He's being commended for being shrewd. Remember that this is Jesus speaking to us, Jesus telling this parable, and we know that Jesus can have nothing to do with sin. So he could not be commending dishonest behaviour. We know from various other Bible passages, such as Proverbs 11, that the Lord detests dishonest scales. Jesus showed his attitude to dishonesty and swindlers in the temple when he cleaned them out. So what's going on here? Could it be that a dishonest man is teaching us a good example? The manager is commended for being shrewd. So then I think the first question is, well, what does shrewd mean? A dictionary definition won't help you greatly. It says shrewd means astute, someone who has or shows sharp powers of judgment. So in this situation, I don't find that very helpful. So then another tool that we can use is to look for other places in Scripture where the word shrewd is used. Maybe that will help us understand what the story is all about. In 2 Samuel 22 and in Psalm 18, these words are repeated. I presume they're coming up, great. To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To the blameless, you show yourself blameless. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the devious, you show yourself shrewd. David talking to the Lord there. But to me, the manager seems both devious and shrewd. So that doesn't help me. Maybe it's helped you, but doesn't. Another important place where the word shrewd is used, again, Jesus speaking, when he sends out his disciples in Matthew 10, he says to them, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves, so be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. But what does it mean to be as shrewd as snakes? Most of us recoil at the thought of snakes. We hate snakes. We're conditioned to hate snakes. For good reason. They're dangerous. So this example of being as shrewd as snakes maybe isn't that helpful either. And the story in Genesis 3 of the serpent's role in the fall certainly doesn't help us either. I spent about 5 years working or ministering cross-culturally, and I understood there that it's very easy for a picture in one culture not to carry a meaning across to another culture. And I think that we are so culturally conditioned as Westerners against snakes that it's hard to learn anything valuable from them. So I'm going to employ the principles of cross-cultural communication and introduce you to a shrewd cow. Now, I met this cow in February of this year in Tasmania. So in February I went on a farm tour with a number of farmers, and we visited 6 or 7 dairy farms. 2 of those dairy farms use what's called halter technology, or virtual fencing is another term by which it's known. We're not allowed to use it yet in Victoria because of ethical concerns, but they use it in Tasmania. So halter fencing, and you can't quite see it in the picture, but these cows have a collar on. And on each side of the collar is a little beeper, sound beeper, just like that thing in your car when you're getting close to the car in front when you're trying to park. It makes a noise. And so when the farmer wants to send his cows to a paddock, he draws a little thing on his phone, on the map of the farm on his phone, and if the cow's standing this way and the farmer wants the cow to go over there, this beeper starts sounding in this ear, and the cow turns around, the beeper stops, and the cow moves off in the right direction. Where it is mostly used, though, is in place of strip-grazed fencing. So you know that, and you can see the line in that photo of where the fence is, where the cows are not meant to be, and where they are meant to be. And in Victoria, we use an electric wire to mark that line, whereas if you use halter technology, there's no wire. It's an invisible fence. And as the cow draws closer to that line, her beeper goes beep, 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 really loud. If she crosses over that line, she's got about 15 seconds before she gets a very mild electric shock. Now, I felt it. If you're worried about being cruel, you can barely feel it when you touch it. There's a cow in Tasmania who has worked out that she's got 15 seconds across that line before she'll get a shock. And she goes over that line, grabs a few mouthfuls, and then walks back, lets it reset, and then does it again. Now, that cow is shrewd. So back to our manager. What does he do? First, he assesses himself realistically, and he says, well, I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm too ashamed to beg. What can I use? How can I use the resources at my disposal to make sure that I'm going to be okay in the future when I'm unemployed? So he decides to use money, albeit someone else's money, to win friends for himself so that when he is unemployed, they'll look after him. The key phrase here is that he uses money, and that it is a shrewd use of money for which he is commended. Now, you might be saying, well, hang on, that's someone else's money, though. Well, isn't that true for all of us as believers? Didn't we just sing, all to Jesus I surrender? Did you have a little bit at the end say, accept my money? Or do you just mumble those lines? When we become believers, don't we give everything to the Lord, including our money? Just hold that thought. So what is the lesson here? Verse 9 seems to spell it out. Jesus says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Sorted? Well, no, not really. Does that mean we buy our way into heaven? Didn't Jesus understand the doctrine of salvation by grace? Well, of course he did. So what's he trying to tell us? Remember, there's a double audience here. It begins by saying Jesus was speaking to his disciples, but we know at the end of the parable that the Pharisees were also there and listening. The Pharisees who, verse 14, tell us, love money. It's unlikely they'll heed Jesus' advice here, but we can learn by contrast what attitude not to have. I want to suggest there's 3 important principles here. The first is use your money, your earthly wealth, for eternal purposes. We need to teach our wealth a lesson. We need to show our wealth that it's not in charge of us, that we're in charge of it. Often we admire outstanding feats, whether they're athletics or musical or whatever it might be. And anyone who achieves those feats will tell you that it didn't happen overnight, that it took a lot of training. On Thursday I was reading the paper and I read this story about a circus performer named Leela Noon who set a world record, and she's now in the Guinness World Record for this, for being suspended by her hair for 25 minutes and 11.3 seconds. There's something to aspire to. Most of us don't do anything that might damage or increase the chances of our hair falling out. But Leela says that it took her 2 years of training to get to that point. So for 2 years, she's been hanging herself by her hair. Good on her. A more admirable example actually is sitting in this room. Simon, I hope you don't mind if I mention your name. Simon Schultz is here and he loves to run long distances. Sometimes when I go out from my house walking my dogs, and I'm just walking, or it's more ambling now, I meet Simon and his friend come running down the track while I'm walking the other way. Now, Simon doesn't live near me, so I know that if he comes and I meet him there, he's doing this loop, he's run 10 Ks. And that's just his training. I'd be training to get to 10 Ks, but he's running 10 Ks because he wants to run 50, 100 Ks. He knows that he can't do it without that discipline and that training. We need to have the same attitude to our money. We need to use our money wisely, and that won't happen without discipline and without training, without making the effort to make sure we're using our money for eternal purposes. And we're not buying friends here. That's not what it means in verse 9. What it means is we're going to have friends we didn't realise we had when we get to heaven. What it's going to look like if you use your money wisely and use it shrewdly for eternal purposes is that you'll get to heaven and someone will come up to you and say, "Oh, I know you. You bought Bibles for my tribe. And because of that, I was able to read the Word of God in my own language and I became a believer." You might meet someone, I don't know if we're still going to have tattoos in heaven, but you might meet someone who's got a full skull tattoo who says, "I was in prison and you paid for prison fellowship to come and visit me, or you supplied biscuits at the Easter bake." Did your churches do that? I don't know, ours did. And that was such an act of kindness and love that I realised there's a God who loves me, and that's why I'm here in heaven. We're going to find friends that we never knew we had. Use your money for eternal purposes. Each morning when I'm having breakfast, I read the paper, and I always finish when I get to death notices. That's the signal for me that time's up, I've got to go to work. But I like to read the death notices. I do it every day. And it's not macabre. It's because I like to think of the stories that are contained in those few little lines. I also look at the year they're born, thinking, good, I've got another 20 years to go. But I love to think about the stories behind those lines. But one thing that is never mentioned in those lines is how much money they had in the bank. It's who they were loved by, who they were cherished by. Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:7, "We brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it." Use your wealth for eternal purposes. The second principle, which I think is quite mind-blowing, is that use of one's wealth is indicative of one's fitness to handle the true riches of the gospel. Whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much. And in verse 11, "So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches?" My attitude to money, and therefore how I handle my money, has an impact on how God trusts me with true riches, the message of the gospel. That's scary and it's challenging. But the reason is straightforward, and that's the third principle. You cannot serve both God and money. It's one or the other. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you can serve both. And that's why the Pharisees were so hardened against Jesus, because they loved money, they served money, they didn't serve God. And so when God was standing right in front of them, they couldn't recognise him. We often say that fire is a great servant but a terrible master. Well, that's true for money too. Money is a great servant, but a terrible master because it will take you away from God. So in closing, not quite in closing, but the three words you've been listening for. So in closing, let me ask you three questions. Are you investing in the eternal wealth of people or investing only in temporal, earthly things? We have our earthly needs. I'm not denying that, of course. But are you investing in the eternal wealth of people as well? Who is your master, God or money? When was the last time you taught your wealth a lesson? When you showed it that you're in charge of it, it wasn't in charge of you. Let me finish with this quote, which I heard from David Cook, which some of you will know. I think it's a very fitting way to close. To be a Christian is to receive God's good gifts, to enjoy them the most, to need them the least, and to give them away the most freely.